ship left on the dock for more than 24 hours will be compressed to a cube at the owner's expense. Welcome to Sacred Cow Shipyards.
Did you know that approximately a decade ago by your calendar, a certain author by the name of M.C.A. Hogarth wrote a book called Spots the Space Marine? Probably you didn't, because the book didn't last very long because your Amazon.com system took it down. The author, of course, inquired as to why her book was struck from the system. Well, I imagine some of you can see where this is going already, because a certain workshop that produces games got cranky about the term Space Marine. In fact, the Electronic Frontier Foundation had to get involved, and the takedown was eventually reversed. Yes, you heard that right. An independent author actually took a certain company to the woodshed, behind the woodshed even. It was exciting. Well, after that epic beatdown that wasn't really necessary, because come on, Space Marines, let's talk about who has a prior claim on that phrase. But regardless, after that beatdown, a whole pile of other authors decided to jump on the opportunity and produce all these anthologies about, Space Marines. Only none of them actually bothered to invite M.C.A. Hogarth to participate. Until now. So yes, this episode is actually sponsored by Raconteur Press's 6th anthology, otherwise aptly titled, Space Marines. And guess what name leads the list of authors who actually wrote stories for this anthology? In fact, she's got a second story that is going in a second Space Marine anthology. I mean, it's only fitting, given that she donned the power armor of legalese and took an idiot company to task. I'm sure someone more versed in Warhammer 40,000 could come up with a better idiom than that, but here we are. And there you are going to buy the book, right? Right. And as one last piece of administrivia before we get on with the show, I find myself in something of an awkward situation where it seems to be socially necessary for me to express gratitude. Naturally, I'm great at this. So, without further ado, I would like to extend the Shipyards thanks to an optically emissive porcine out there on the YouTube who has decided that I am less shit than some of the other shit floating around in the shit pool of YouTube. Thanks, dude. And now, yes, on with the show. Have you ever known something that you know, but you can't quite put your finger on how you know it, and then you can't actually find any kind of reference that actually corroborates your knowledge? Oh, who am I kidding? Of course you do. After all, you do most of your computational and memory storage efforts with, this weird misshapen blob of jelly. I imagine you're constantly forgetting everything you know and then trying to figure out how you knew it in the first place. Anyways, what I'm about to tell you, I know, but I can't seem to find the references that corroborate that knowledge. I don't know if that's because they just never got uploaded to your horribly inefficient intertubes, or if my ability to search it is somehow hampered by that absolutely horrid structure of it. But regardless, I know it. I'm fairly sure it's right, so we're going to run with it. Now, Klingon ships from Star Trek. Have you ever wondered why they all look the same? You know what I'm talking about. The D7s, the Bird of Prey, the vor'cha, the negh'var, all of those warships kind of look like you take one of those annoying migratory waterfowl. What are they called? What? Canada goose? That can't be its real name. That is its real name. That is a stupid name for a stupid bird, so I guess at least it's symmetrical. But anyways, yeah, they basically looks like you take a Canada goose and, pluck all its feathers out and just, splay it out, and suddenly you have a Klingon warship. Why is that exactly?
Well, the short story is that the prop department needed to make something that was very clearly not Federation, not the big saucer or the engineering section and the two nacelles. They needed a visually distinctive ship design for those ridiculously low-quality TVs you had back when the original series came out, so that you could see the good guys and the bad guys clearly without mistaking them or mixing them up. However, as always seems to happen with these kinds of situations, there's also an in-universe explanation for the design, at least specifically for the D7, which was then carried forward into all the future designs, basically because Klingons are unimaginative twerps who like doing the same thing over and over again, just with more guns. Can you really blame them? If it works, it works. So anyways, the Delta 7 class, which was basically the Klingons' battlecruiser during the original series time period. It eventually got upgraded into the Katinga class, but really the Delta 7 was kind of the foundation of the Klingon ship aesthetic. She was built and designed to basically be a counterpart to the Federation's Constitution class, which you probably best know an example of by way of the Enterprise herself. Crew complements are about the same. The Delta 7 is technically a little shorter, but it has some ridiculous weapons and, of course, a Klingon cloaking device. On top of that, since the Delta 7 is an actual battle cruiser as opposed to Federation tap dancing around the idea of building warships, she kind of eschews the whole, scientist side of the Enterprise and goes into the full combat mode that we all expect Klingons to know and love. In fact, the second lowest deck on the Katinga class actually has 5 21-person transporter pads because it's a combat ship. They're planning on landing combat teams on the planet or boarding other ships or doing the usual Klingon combat stuff. But it's important to note that transporter assembly and its associated staging area is at the stern of the rear section of the Delta 7. Like I said, if you look at Klingon ships, they all have basically the same design. You got the little head up front, the long skinny neck, and then you got the big winged section in the back, which typically houses such things as the shuttlecraft bay, the warp nacelles, the warp core, impulse engines, and the crew. And this is the distinctive, important part. I mean, yes. Technically, the main hull contained, all of the ship's cargo capabilities and a significant chunk of its fabrication capabilities. And the larger medical bay, there's actually a smaller one up in the head section, and all these other things. But the big deal, the really, really big deal, is that the crew of the ship berthed in the back. The officers, they had their quarters up in the head, which in this case does not actually refer to that toilet thing that you have on your nautical ships. Regardless, there is a reason for this, and it's not just posturing about having the nice real estate on a warship. Instead, I am sure that all of y'all are familiar with the trope of the Klingon promotion. Apparently this isn't actually as serious as the Klingons made it out to be initially, but basically, there was a presumption among the Federation for a time that one of the fastest ways to get promoted in Klingon society is to kill your superior. Obviously, he was incompetent if you let one of his subordinates kill him, so you get his job now. Don't get killed by one of yours. Now, as it turns out, it's not quite as easy as just randomly walking up to the captain and popping him. It actually had to work out that the superior you're killing is actually your direct superior, your direct report, and he has to be in some way signaling his failure as whoever the hell he's supposed to be. He has to be incompetent. He has to have shown cowardice in the face of enemies. He has to be a significant problem on the ship. You just can't just walk up and kill anybody. I mean, technically you can, but then you'd probably be killed too, which kind of defeats the point. Now, apparently in Mirror Universe Star Trek, it actually is that simple. You can kill your superiors for basically any reason, and then you get their job. I guess it's the old necromonger, you keep what you kill notion. But we don't really talk about Mirror Universe very much. But in the main universe, this was a very real threat for Klingon officers. But that doesn't explain the structure of the ship, does it? I mean, that's kind of like a one-on-one conversation, isn't it? Well, the other big problem on Klingon ships is kind of related. They had a lot of mutinies. I mean, let's face it, conditions on Klingon warships are notoriously bad. They take Spartan to a whole new level with layers of crud and nastiness and weird dog things and all this other stuff going on. And frequently, crews would get fucking tired of it. And they did what crews have been doing even on your planet since there have been warships. They decide they could take over and do a better job themselves. Well, naturally, the Klingons understood this propensity in their species and decided to give the officers a little bit of a bonus in case this decided to happen. So, that forward section of the Delta 7. It's, like I said, where all the officers are berthed. It's where the bridge naturally is. It's where all the significantly important stuff on the ship is. It's connected to the main body of the ship by way of the boom. It's a very narrow neck, as you can even see from the outside, and there is a single turbolift shaft that connects the front section of the ship to the aft section of the ship. Naturally, the entire turbolift system is controlled by the bridge, and they can shut it down whenever they want. Okay, that solves the turbolift problem. But what if something actually breaks and they have to actually get out there into the boom and fix it manually without the turbolift's assistance? Well, that's where the piping and wiring trunks that run down both sides of the boom come in. Think of those as Klingon Jeffries tubes back before Jeffries tubes were called Jeffries tubes. As an aside, the use of the term Jeffries tube basically came canonical in the third season of Star Trek The Next Generation, and the in-universe explanation is that it was named after the Starfleet engineer W.M. Jeffries. In reality, this character was named after Matt Jeffries, the designer of the original USS Enterprise and the art director for Star Trek The Original Series. The Axis tubes were actually jokingly referred to as Jeffries tubes in the original series, but the name didn't quite stick until The Next Generation. And it was not actually Mr. Jeffries' idea, but he couldn't argue with it once it happened. Regardless, there's one piping and wiring trunk on each side of the boom on the only level that is complete for the entire length of the boom. There are other spaces on the top and bottom of the boom, but they don't reach all the way to the forward section. So, they're passageways. I mean, if the turbolift gets shut down, the mutineers can just walk down the passageways, right? Not so much. After all, if nothing else, this trunk is going to be full of wires and pipes and who knows what else running around and through it and over it and under it and whatever else. It's not exactly meant for human occupation. It's meant to get out there and fix something if you have to. It's meant to connect the systems in the stern with the systems in the front. In fact, some of those wires might be really, really exciting if you touch them the wrong way. But the real kicker is that the trunks end right before the boom in what's called squeezeways. This isn't a passageway, this is a squeezeway. Otherwise known as a choke point. Doors and corners, man, doors and corners, which is the whole point. The Klingon designers understood that sometimes things broke, sometimes turbolifts broke, and sometimes you had to get out there and fix stuff. Fine. That leads us to the piping and wiring trunk. But the piping and wiring trunk should be accessible from both ends in case you had to get to it a certain way to fix whatever you needed to fix. Fine. They also understood that Klingons were prone to mutiny. Well, that's a problem. So, we make it hard. We make it so that the head end of the boom's trunkways will only allow one Klingon through at a time, and uncomfortably at that. And, well, that doesn't work out well for the guy at the front, especially given that Klingons typically use disruptors, which typically disintegrate the target that they're shooting at. So, yeah, not only are the squeezeways limiting you in how many people you can shove through them at any given time, but the dead bodies that are going to pile up and give you cover aren't actually going to pile up or give you cover. It's a shooting gallery. I mean, the hilarious thing is both the forward section and the stern section have their own weapons proficiency ranges. But this is literally shooting Klingons who are not known for their nimbleness in a really tight passageway. That's not the idiom, but it's literally just a straight passageway. You can't miss. So yeah, that's why the Delta 7 set up like that. That's why the Katinga set up like that too, since it's basically an upgraded Delta 7. The Bird of Prey, being a much, much smaller ship, had a slightly different setup. It didn't have the turbolift shaft going down the neck. It just had a passageway, but it still only had the one passageway that was reinforced and had basically fighting positions on the bridge side of the conversation. By the time you get to the vor'cha and the negh'var, the Klingons appear to have calmed down a little, and The style still stuck around, but the functionality wasn't really there anymore. They still had the head, neck, body design, but the neck is much, much wider now, and we don't have any good blueprints or diagrams of the internal of the ship anymore, but it's a fair bet that they're not really set up to be a shooting gallery for officers defending themselves from a mutiny. But that fear successfully defined an entire species' ship designs for hundreds of years. Kind of crazy, right? I mean, as stupid as Starfleet ship designs are, and they're basically universally stupid, with some exceptions, and we'll get there at some point on this channel, the Klingon ship design is almost as stupid, with this stupidly long neck that serves almost no purpose. Unless you know the purpose that it was actually meant for. Which, as I said at the very beginning, may be an entire fabrication of my complex processing system. I can't find any actual corroboration of this anywhere. But honestly, I just gave up looking and recorded the episode, and here we are. Also, amusingly, just as a parting note, apparently that whole boom section with the head attached was actually meant to be separable from the D7 and be a lifeboat. He'd even had little tiny engines and stuff. What is it with Star Trek and its desire to have modular, well, not really modular, but separable ships? I mean, even the original 1701 was supposed to be able to do that. They just didn't have the budget to make it happen in the show. Seems like your ship falling apart is a bad thing.
And that's all from Sacred Cow Shipyards. Please be advised that any ship left on the docks for more than 24 hours will be compressed to a cube at the owner's expense. Have a nice day.